Yeah, well, in this series of faith, we've been looking at people who have been stepping out and doing things differently. And today, I have my friend Nigel with me. And hi, Nigel, and it's great to be with you here and looking forward to hearing about what you've been up to recently. And I understand that you've been working on something very encouraging.
Uh, yeah, thanks, Kev. Thanks for the opportunity. I've been working on a project, it's called Transforming Story, the Transforming Story. Been working on it a little while now, and it's about uh, the biblical worldview, and worldviews in general. But what is a worldview? Well, if I can use an illustration of like a pair of glasses, if you're wearing glasses. So now, when people wear glasses, they don't look at their glasses, do they? They look through their glasses. And in the same way, people look through their assumptions, through the glasses of their assumptions, reality, and they assume certain things about reality, um, but often without thinking. They don't often think about what they believe about the world and about human beings and about history and life after death, things like that. That they can take things for granted. So a worldview is a bit like that. It's we look through the lens of our assumptions at the world, but often, like I say, without thinking. Um, and so it's like that. A worldview is like that. It's what we presuppose about reality. Um, and also it's you can use another illustration like a tree. When we look at a tree, we see the trunk, we see the branches, we see the fruit, but we don't actually see the roots of the tree. So belief systems or worldviews are a bit like that. There are roots to a certain belief, but then the trunk represents the values of those beliefs. Then the branches point to the behavior, and the fruit represents the consequences of those beliefs. Um, and every worldview is rooted in something and has consequences.
Yeah, so why did you pursue this sort of particular project?
Well, because the gospel is basically a worldview. It starts with creation. It then has, when we have the fall of man, then we have redemption, and then we have restoration, which is the new heavens and the new earth. So, if you think of four questions, where did the universe come from? Or what does it mean to be human? Which is really a twofold question. Um, what is wrong with the world? Every belief has an answer to those questions. So where the universe came from, what is wrong with the world? And the third question is, what is the solution to what is wrong with the world? And every belief system has their own solutions to what is wrong with the world. And then finally, where is history going? So those four questions, every worldview has their own answers to those questions. The question is, which worldview is true and corresponds with reality as it really is.
Yeah, so how does this project relate to our lives today?
Well, like I say, everybody has a belief about reality. So what you believe affects the way you behave, and then there are consequences to that. But if we think of two words as a way to kind of evaluate the world in which we live, those two words, structure and direction. So God has put structures into creation, like marriage, the family, education, government. So there are many structures in creation, but there's only two directions. human beings are either oriented toward God, the one true God, the creator of the universe, or they're oriented toward worshipping something in creation. So it is about worship, that there's no neutral ground, that we're either oriented to worshipping the one true God or worshipping something from within our creation. So how it relates to our lives is, for example, our identity. What does it mean to be human? And that is, I think, a major issue today, is identity and what it means to be human. So what is the world? What is the culture? How does the culture answer that question of what it means to be human? For example, artificial intelligence. Some believe that that's a good thing. Others would critique it because it changes what it means to be human. Is technology going too far with artificial intelligence? So it relates to our lives in how we think, what we believe, but especially what it means to be human, which is the main battle today, I would argue, in our culture, is what it means to be human. And actually the gospel has a very comprehensive answer to that question, because we are created in the image and the likeness of God, and therefore all humans deserve dignity. You know, we all can have dignity because we're all created in the image of God. Therefore, justice is important. Truth is important. So it really does, you know, come up close and personal in our everyday lives of what we believe.
That's really, really interesting, because I don't think that message is probably heard enough, that explanation. And what would you say are the dominant worldviews in our culture today?
This is a big question. What are the dominant worldviews in our culture today? Some would say secularism. I would start with humanism. I think if you, again, think of the tree, yeah, the roots. So Western culture is, you know, based on secularism. I think that's, you know, pretty much a given that it's a secular society. But there is, you know, that's only the kind of the fruits of the tree, if you like. But what are the roots of secularism? If you go deeper, it's humanism. Man becomes the measure of all things. Man replaces God. Just like, it's a bit like the question in Eden, you know, has God really said? You know, so when human beings question the word of God and replace God with themselves, then man becomes at the center. So the dominant worldview really is humanism, but then there are lots of different fruits to that. Think of the 20th century. You know, there's a large consensus that the 20th century was the most violent century in human history, and that there were more people killed in the 20th century than in any other century, which is, you know, pretty massive, really, when you think about it. You know, why is that? Well, at the end of the 19th century, there was a declaration that God is dead. And then, so man tried to get rid of God, but there are consequences to the roots of what we believe. And then what happens is we have 2 world wars in the 20th century, and man tries to kill man. So the dominant worldview is humanism, but then communism and fascism in the 20th century, which killed millions. But then there's lots of other isms like relativism, where truth is seen as relative. There are no absolutes anymore. Paganism, that rejects the distinction between a creator and the creation. Secularism, like I said. So, so today, as I mentioned just now, with AI, artificial intelligence, science and technology assume that our future is to create a kind of a mixture, a hybrid between man and machine. That is, in a sense, where evolution is going. That's the direction that evolution is assuming to take us. Is that a neutral issue? Well, I would say no, it's not. That is a serious issue. So, yeah, so humanism, I would say, is the root of the tree of modern culture, and those other isms that have come out of that, where man interprets reality apart from God. But there are consequences to that.
Mm. What then is your view on the culture that we're living in today?
Well, I would start with Genesis 1, verse 1, the very first in the Bible, first verse in the Bible. Because Genesis 1, verse 1 states that history has a beginning point in time, and that time itself has a beginning. So that is actually inseparable for our understanding of what it means to be human and the true meaning of human existence. So my view of the culture is that because man has replaced God and man is now at the center, there is a verse also in the New Testament that relates to Genesis, and that is what man does without God. So there's a verse in Romans chapter 1, verse 25 says that human beings, apart from God, they exchange the truth of God for the lie, and they worship and serve the creature instead of the creator. So that means that when there is no neutral ground. Human beings either are oriented toward God or toward the creation or something within the creation. There's no neutral ground. So it's about worship. Human beings will define themselves by something. We cannot live in a vacuum. But we were created for God. And we were created to reflect his glory in creation. And so the culture is based on humanism. And what are the consequences of humanism, of what it means to be human? Well, you could use many examples. Abortion is one example where Western culture, murders millions and millions of babies every year. Because if we've evolved, and there's no, eternal, there's no God to be accountable to, and truth is relative, and there are no absolutes, then you can pretty much do anything, and you can justify your behavior because there's no accountability, because everything is relative. So you can murder millions of babies as an example, and that's okay because there's no accountability. But Romans 1 verse 25, what it really unpacks is that if you take God out of the picture, you're left with a pagan culture, and you will worship creation or something within it. And so it basically becomes a culture of idolatry. Think, money is an idol. People define themselves by money. I mean, arguably politicians today are looking toward billionaires to influence their decisions, because maybe the god of Mammon, that idol, defines their worldview. So some human beings will take something from within the creation and define their lives by it. And so the culture that we view in today is a paganized culture of idolatry, a bit like Paul in Athens, who observed Athens and all the idols in Athens.
Yeah. So what do you think are the root issues the church needs to address?
Well, again, going back to these two words of structure and direction, again, this is a very big question, but let me give you another illustration of, imagine a Swiss mountain village high up in the mountains. and the village represents the church. And there's an avalanche of snow coming down the mountain, threatening to destroy the village. The avalanche of snow represents humanism and man's view of reality apart from God. The avalanche of snow is coming to swamp and overwhelm this small mountain village, which represents the church. But so people in the village, what would they do? They'd probably flee and run for their lives, wouldn't they? Some may stay. So historically, when that happened, like about 250 years ago, when you had an avalanche of humanism, capitalism, individualism, secularism, where man replaced God, the church, some of the church took to the hills and retreated and separated themselves from the world and became fundamentalist and a bit like joining a monastery. They separated from the world. They didn't engage with the world anymore because of the overwhelming avalanche of humanism and secularism. But there were some that embraced the avalanche and maybe became a bit liberal, toward the liberal end of the spectrum. And they embraced it. But during that time, in the sort of mid 18th, 19th century, is that science started to challenge the biblical worldview and started challenging the belief in miracles, because science was taking over. And so the belief in miracles was rejected, and the belief in a creator, the deity of the Lord Jesus Christ, the Bible, the validity of the Bible, and the character of the personal creator God. All of those were challenged. And that was the avalanche of snow of humanism, secularism. And some of the church, like I say, embraced it, and it really distorted the biblical worldview. So in terms of the root issues, that also affected the church, but you can go way back before that to the early church with something called dualism, like so the sacred secular divide. So there is kind of an assumption that everything inside of church is sacred and everything outside is secular, and that's dualism. That's actually Greek thought, and it goes back to Greek thought. That creates a split personality, and you end up living a compartmentalized life. So this is my church life. I go to this meeting on a Sunday morning, and the rest of my week, God's not interested in that. And so we don't take the lordship of Christ into our everyday lives if we have a dualistic mind of that sacred secular. And that has really undermined the engagement with the culture. And the church, because of that, surrendered the public arena of life. It surrendered it to humanism, and humanism basically filled the vacuum. And so all of our institutions in society, they're deeply secular, and faith or a biblical worldview is not actually allowed a voice. So the dualism of sacred secular, the lordship of Christ, a biblical worldview, we need to equip people with a biblical worldview that the gospel actually starts in Genesis 1 verse 1. It doesn't start in John 3:16, for God so loved the world. However true that is, it actually starts in Genesis 1 verse 1, because Jesus Christ is God. He is the creator who becomes the redeemer. But what's he redeeming? He's not just redeeming human beings so they can go to heaven when they die. He's redeeming the whole of creation, because there is a creation, but it fell because man chose to rebel against God. Then God comes in the fullness of time in his incarnation, and then we live in between the first and the second coming, obviously, in the tension between the already and the not yet of the kingdom. And when he comes back, there will be a new heavens and a new earth, from creation to new creation. We need that mindset to have a truly biblical worldview. And actually, if we don't have that comprehensive worldview, we don't actually have a biblical worldview. That may sound a bit controversial to say that, but you know, if we neglect creation or you neglect the consummation when the new heavens and new earth, you've got an imbalanced, sort of distorted view. It's not a truly biblical worldview.
Wow, there is so much packed into that, Nigel. And I know that people are going to say, I want to know more. I need to know more. How can they get hold of you and find out more about these subjects?
Well, my email is thebiggerstory1@gmail.com. You can email me there. Also via your website, because as well, Highway 358 website as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they can contact me through my email.
And if people are wanting to know, so what they've heard today is been fantastic, and they really want to get interested in this. Is there any sort of courses or things that you're doing that are coming up soon that they can enroll on?
Well, I already have a course called Life Quest, that's really about our calling. What is our calling in life? And it looks at the bigger picture of our life story, and to try and really connect with our true heart by looking at maybe ways that we got stuck in our lives. So that's about our calling. But this one that I've just been discussing with you is called The Transforming Story. And I'm putting that into different forms, like a podcast, like podcasts, because it's 4 chapters, obviously creation, fall, redemption, and consummation, restoration. I'm doing 4 chapters. So I've just been discussing aspects of chapter 1 with you today. So I'm putting a course together with questions, and you know, we can have a Zoom. You know, we can do it on Zoom, 1-to-1, or with a group, to discuss worldviews, different beliefs of the world today, and the culture that we're living in, to understand the times in which we live. You know, they can contact me through that email address, through your website as well. So I do courses on calling and worldviews, but I also do stuff on masculinity as well, on biblical manhood as well.
Right.
Those are the 3 areas.
Yeah, that's really, really important stuff that you're saying there. And, you know, I would encourage anybody, if they would want to get into this. I've known Nigel for some time now, and, you know, really interesting, deep stuff that really is transforming lives. And, you know, if you really want to know more, go to that email, enroll on it, and Nigel will get back to you, and we'll be able to guide you to whatever courses are available, or even in just having a one-to-ones about situations. So just want to say thank you, Nigel, for a fantastic interview here. And, you know, I've been sitting here, you haven't really heard much about, I haven't really said a lot, because, wow, there's just so much to take in, and you've covered it so well. So thank you so much.
Well, thanks a lot, Kev. Thanks a lot. Thanks for giving me the opportunity.